You can choose him. The room went so quiet that I could hear the rain striking the glass behind me. Across the long conference table, Clara stared at me as if I had just said something insane. "You're serious?" she asked. I looked at the man sitting beside her. Ethan, my best friend, my business partner, and a man Clara had secretly loved for the last 3 years. I had spent my first life trying to stop this moment from happening. I had begged Clara not to leave me. I had confronted Ethan. I had worked until my hands shook, thinking that if I became successful enough, dependable enough, indispensable enough, she would eventually understand that I was the one who had always stood beside her. It had taken me 32 years to learn how foolish that was. And now, after dying once and waking up 5 years in the past, I finally understood something much simpler. If Clara wanted Ethan, I would let her have him. I leaned back in my chair. "Choose him," I repeated. "I'm tired of competing for someone who has already made her decision." Clara's lips parted. Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Daniel," he said quietly, "this isn't what you think." I almost laughed. That sentence, those exact words. In my previous life, I had heard them so many times that they had become part of the soundtrack of my destruction. "This isn't what you think. You're being too sensitive. Clara and I are just friends. You should trust us." I had trusted them, and that trust had cost me everything. 5 years ago, I had been 27 and hopelessly in love with Clara. She was the daughter of a wealthy family, brilliant, proud, and impossible to read. I had known her since university. Back then, she had once fallen asleep on my shoulder in the library after studying all night. When she woke, she had smiled and whispered, "Daniel, if I ever get married, I want someone who makes me feel safe." I remembered those words now, because I had spent years trying to become that person. Meanwhile, Ethan had been the person she secretly ran to whenever she was unhappy with me. In my first life, I fought him. I blamed him. I blamed her. Then I blamed myself. I worked harder. I gave up opportunities. I covered Ethan's mistakes at our company because I thought protecting our partnership would protect my relationship with Clara. It didn't. Eventually, Ethan stole one of our company's largest clients. Clara sided with him. My company collapsed. My engagement ended. And 6 months later, after discovering that the woman I loved had known about the betrayal long before I did, I walked alone through a storm and never made it home. The last thing I remembered was headlights. Then darkness. Then I opened my eyes in a hospital room. The calendar on the wall said 5 years earlier. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then Clara walked through the door. She was 27 again. Young, familiar, alive in a way that made my chest hurt. She smiled at me and said, "You scared me." I stared at her for nearly a minute. That was when I knew. I had been given another chance. But I wasn't going to use it to win her back. I was going to use it to stop losing myself. So when she finally admitted she wanted Ethan, I didn't fight. I simply stood. "I'll sign the partnership papers tomorrow," I said. "Ethan can take my position." Clara frowned. "Why are you suddenly doing this?" I smiled faintly. "Because I finally believe you." I walked out. For the first time in my life, I didn't look back. The strange thing about leaving was that nobody believed I had actually left. By the next morning, Clara had sent me 7 messages. "Are you angry? Can we talk?" "Daniel, you're acting strangely. Please don't make this dramatic." I read them all. Then I put my phone face down. In my previous life, I would have replied immediately. I would have explained every emotion. I would have asked her to reconsider. I would have reminded her of our memories. Instead, I went to the old office building on East Harbor Street. The company was still small, barely 12 employees. Our biggest project was a logistics software system that almost nobody believed would succeed. In my previous life, Ethan had convinced everyone to abandon it. He called it a pointless technical experiment. I had listened to him. That had been my first major mistake. This time, I walked into the development room and found the 3 programmers staring at a broken prototype. "Mr. Chun," one of them said nervously, "the system crashed again." "I know. You still want to continue?" I pulled up a chair. "Yes." But Ethan said, "Ethan doesn't make technical decisions anymore." They exchanged confused looks. I rolled up my sleeves. "Show me the problem." For the next 6 hours, I worked beside them. I remembered more than I had realized. In my first life, I had spent years building systems that other people took credit for. I knew which clients would eventually need automation. I knew which technologies were about to become mainstream. I knew that this small logistics platform could become the foundation of a company worth hundreds of millions. But I wasn't going to become rich overnight. I had learned enough from my first life to know that success wasn't magic. It was preparation meeting opportunity. That evening, Clara appeared at the office. She stood at the doorway while I was reviewing code. "Daniel." I didn't look up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. You've ignored me all day." "I was working." "You're never like this." That made me smile. "You're right." She walked closer. "I thought we were getting married." "So did I." Her expression tightened. "Then why are you giving me to Ethan so easily?" I finally looked at her. Because she had asked me to choose. Because I had already died once for this relationship. Because I knew exactly where this road ended. But I couldn't tell her that. So I simply said, because love shouldn't feel like a competition. She went silent. For a moment, I saw the girl from university again. The girl who had slept on my shoulder. The girl who had once said she wanted someone who made her feel safe. A painful memory surfaced. 3 years later, in my first life, I had found a photograph from that night. Clara had been asleep beside me, and Ethan had taken it. I had never understood why he kept that photograph. Now I did. I closed my laptop. "Clara, if you choose Ethan, I won't hate you." Her eyes reddened. "But I won't wait for you either." She stared at me for a long time. Then she whispered, "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No." I stood and walked past her. "The person who will regret it isn't me." Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something chasing me. It felt like something I could finally choose. And somewhere behind me, Clara remained standing in the empty office, staring at the man she thought would always come back. She didn't know that this time, I had no intention of returning. 3 weeks passed. Clara stopped asking me to come back. At least, she stopped asking directly. Instead, she began appearing wherever I happened to be. At the office, at client meetings, even at the small coffee shop across the street, where I sometimes worked late. Each time, she acted as though our separation was temporary. "You're working too much," she said one evening, placing a cup of coffee beside my laptop. I glanced at it. "Thanks." She sat across from me. "You haven't asked about Ethan." "Why would I?" Her fingers tightened around her phone. "Because you used to care." "I still care." "Then why don't you?" I looked at her. "Because caring about someone doesn't mean I have to control their choices." She didn't answer. That sentence seemed to bother her more than anger ever could. In my previous life, I had been desperate to know what Clara and Ethan were doing. I checked their messages. I questioned their friends. I waited outside restaurants. I turned every ordinary conversation into an investigation. It never made me feel better. It only made me smaller. This time, I refused to become that person again. Instead, I focused on the company. The logistics platform was finally beginning to work. Our first serious client was a regional distributor named Northline. They had rejected us twice in my previous life. This time, I knew exactly what they needed. Not because I was lucky, because I remembered the problems they would encounter 6 months from now. I spent nights rebuilding our presentation, improving the system, and personally demonstrating how it could reduce their delivery errors. On the day of the meeting, Ethan walked into the conference room. He was wearing the same confident smile I remembered. "Daniel," he said, "I heard we're pitching Northline." "Yes." "You should let me handle it." "No." He raised an eyebrow. "You're suddenly very confident." "I've always been confident." "No," he said with a small laugh. "You've always been cautious." I closed my laptop. "Maybe I was cautious because I trusted you." His smile disappeared. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned closer. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. You're giving up Clara." "I didn't give her to you. She chose you." His jaw tightened. That was the first time I saw something unexpected in his expression. Fear. Not guilt. Fear. The meeting began before I could think about it. 2 hours later, Northline signed a preliminary agreement. While I returned to the office, everyone was celebrating. Everyone except Ethan. He stood alone near the window. Clara arrived 10 minutes later. She looked at the signed contract. "You won." I nodded. Her eyes moved toward Ethan. He said nothing. She turned back to me. I'm proud of you. The words should have meant everything. Once they would have. Instead, they felt like something I had already outgrown. Thank you. She looked almost disappointed by how little my answer contained. That night, I found an old box in the storage room. Inside was a university notebook. My handwriting covered the first page. Things I want to accomplish before I'm 30. There were ridiculous goals. Travel somewhere alone. Build something people actually use. Start my own company. Buy my parents a house. And one line I had forgotten completely. Become someone I'm proud of even if nobody loves me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed softly. I had spent years chasing love and forgotten the last promise I had made to myself. I put the notebook into my bag. The next morning, I resigned from the partnership I had once built with Claire's family. Everyone thought I was throwing away my security. They didn't know I was finally choosing my own future. The consequences began faster than I expected. Without my technical leadership, the company struggled to keep up with the Northline project. Clara tried to hide it from me. Ethan didn't. One afternoon, he appeared in my office. You need to come back. I didn't even look up. No. Northline is asking questions. Then answer them. They want you. I finally raised my eyes. That's unfortunate. His face hardened. You think this is funny? No. Then why are you smiling? Because for the first time, your problems aren't mine. He stared at me. You're different. Yes. What happened to you? I almost told him. I died. I watched everything you did. I know what you're going to do next. Instead, I said I got tired. He didn't understand. That was fine. Some things didn't need explaining. 2 days later, Clara came to my apartment. She was crying. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Daniel, please. What happened? Ethan and I had an argument. I stayed silent. He said you're trying to destroy us. I almost laughed. I haven't done anything. I know. Then why are you here? She wiped her eyes. Because I don't know what to do. The old version of me would have pulled her into my arms. I would have told her everything was going to be okay. Instead, I asked quietly, do you love him? She froze. That's all I need to know. She looked down. I thought I did. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her back. Because some part of me still remembered the woman I had loved. The woman who had once held my hand beneath the university library table. The woman who had promised we would build a home together. Memories didn't disappear simply because a relationship ended. But memories were not contracts. Clara, I said, you don't have to choose me. She looked at me. But you don't get to keep me waiting while you figure out whether Ethan was a mistake. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. Then why are you so cold? I took a breath. I'm not cold. I looked at her carefully. I'm healing. She covered her mouth. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, will you ever forgive me? I already have. She looked relieved. Then I added, forgiving you doesn't mean I have to return. Her expression collapsed. She turned and walked away. I closed the door. That was the first night I truly believed I had broken free. But the next morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar investor. The message was short. Mr. Chun, I've reviewed your logistics platform. I believe you're building something far more valuable than you realize. There was an attached document, a proposal, and at the bottom was a name I recognized immediately. Victor Hale. In my previous life, Victor had become one of the most influential investors in the technology industry. But I had never met him, because Ethan had rejected his company when they approached us. Victor had eventually invested in a competitor. That competitor had later swallowed our market. I stared at the screen. Then I read the final line. If you're willing to work independently, I would like to discuss turning your prototype into a full-scale company. I leaned back. The opportunity one had lost in my first life had just found me again. And this time, nobody was going to decide for me. I picked up my phone. Then I made the call. Mr. Hale, there was a pause. Yes, I'd like to hear your proposal. Outside my window, the city was waking up. And for the first time, I wasn't running away from my old life. I was building a new one. Victor Hale did not look like the powerful investor I remembered from newspaper headlines. He wore an ordinary gray sweater, carried his own coffee, and spent the first 10 minutes of our meeting asking questions about delivery routes instead of money. What problem are you actually solving? He asked. I opened my laptop. Unpredictability. I showed him the platform. A distributor doesn't lose money because one truck arrives late. They lose money because nobody knows which truck will arrive late until it's already too late. Victor leaned forward. I explained the system I'd spent years developing in my previous life, but had never received credit for. It could analyze traffic, weather, warehouse capacity, driver schedules, and delivery patterns, then predict delays before they happened. Victor watched the demonstration without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "Why didn't your previous company build this?" I hesitated. Because my previous partner didn't believe in it. Victor smiled. Then your previous partner was expensive. I laughed. That was the first time in years someone had described my greatest mistake so simply. 3 months later, I moved into a tiny office with 6 employees. There was no luxurious furniture, no impressive sign outside. Sometimes we couldn't afford lunch. But every evening, when I looked at the people working beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in my previous life. Ownership, not of people, of my own choices. The setbacks came quickly. Our first pilot failed. A warehouse rejected our equipment. A major client demanded features we couldn't afford to build. One developer quit. For 2 weeks, I barely slept. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered the sentence in my old notebook. Become someone I'm proud of even if nobody loves me. So I kept going. Meanwhile, Clara's life was becoming complicated. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. Ethan had become increasingly controlling. He wanted her to convince her family to increase their investment in his projects. She refused. Then came the first major crack. Ethan had used company funds without authorization. Nothing dramatic happened at first. An internal audit simply flagged several transactions. Clara confronted him. "You said this money was for the North Line expansion." "It was." "Then why did it go through 3 different accounts?" Ethan became defensive. "You don't understand business." "Then explain it." "I don't have to explain every decision to you." Clara stared at him. That sentence frightened her, because it sounded exactly like something I had once heard. The difference was that I had always explained myself, even when I shouldn't have. Ethan didn't. A week later, Clara called me. I didn't answer. She called again, then sent a message. "Daniel, I need to talk to you." I replied only once. "I hope you're okay." Nothing more. She didn't respond. I didn't chase her. That was the difference between my old life and this one. I no longer confused someone's crisis with my responsibility. 6 months after I left, our platform finally succeeded. Northline expanded the contract. Then another distributor signed. Then another. Victor invested again. Our 6-person company became 23 people. We moved into a proper office. And one morning, I walked past the reception desk and saw our new company logo mounted on the wall. I stopped. For a moment, I thought about the man I had been before. The man who believed his value depended on whether Clara chose him. I almost felt sorry for him. Then my assistant rushed over. "Daniel, Victor wants you upstairs." "Why?" She handed me a folder. "Because someone just made us an acquisition offer." I opened it. The number made me stop breathing. It wasn't just an offer to buy the company. It was enough money to change my family's life permanently. I looked toward the window. The city stretched beneath me. 5 years ago, I had thought losing Clara meant losing my future. Now I realized something terrifyingly simple. She had never been my future. She had only been part of my past. I turned down the acquisition offer. Victor thought I was crazy. "You understand what they're offering?" "Yes. You could retire." "I don't want to retire." "What do you want?" I looked at the team working downstairs. "I want to see what this becomes." Victor studied me. Then he smiled. "Good answer." But the real surprise came 2 weeks later. A university in another city invited me to speak about independent technology startups. I almost refused. Public speaking had never been my strength. Then I remembered how many times Ethan had called my ideas unrealistic. How many times Clara had said I was too cautious. Maybe I didn't need to prove them wrong. Maybe I simply needed to stop believing them. So I accepted. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. "Your prediction model saved my father's company." I was surprised. "Ow!" "My father runs a small transport business. We couldn't afford expensive software. Your team gave us a trial account." She smiled. "He says your company gave him another chance." I didn't know what to say. For years, I had measured success in money. Now, for the first time, I understood another kind. Impact. That night, I received a message from my mother. Your father is proud of you. I stared at the screen. My father had never been good at expressing emotions. I called him. He answered after 2 rings. Mom told you. Yes. There was a pause. Then he said, you sound different. Different how? Happy. I smiled. I think I am. We talked for almost an hour. Before hanging up, he said something that stayed with me. You spent too long trying to convince people you were worth keeping. I didn't answer. He continued. Your mother and I never needed proof. My throat tightened. Dad, come home this weekend. I will. When I returned, my parents hugged me like I had been gone for years. Maybe emotionally I had. That weekend, I also made a decision. I bought them a house. Not a mansion. Just a comfortable home with a garden and enough space for my father to work on his old cars. When my mother saw the keys, she cried. You didn't have to do this. I know. Then why? I smiled. Because I wanted to. That was what freedom felt like. Giving without fear. Loving without bargaining. Choosing without begging. But while my life was quietly becoming better, Ethan's world was falling apart. The audit discovered more irregularities. The company lost 2 major clients. His investors demanded answers. Then one evening, Clara received a call from a lawyer. Ethan had transferred confidential client information to another company. The evidence was clear. She confronted him. Did you do this? He looked exhausted. I was trying to save the company. You stole information. I was desperate. You lied to me. I did what I had to do. Clara stared at him. And suddenly, she remembered me. Not the successful version of me. Not the man whose company was now appearing in business magazines. She remembered the man who had stayed beside her when her father was hospitalized. The man who had waited outside her examination room. The man who had once sold his motorcycle to pay her university fees when her family account had been frozen. The man she had called boring because he never made her heart race. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, I chose wrong. Ethan looked at her. What? Clara shook her head. No. She wiped her face. I chose exactly what I wanted. Then she walked away. But that night, for the first time, she searched my name online. And what she found made her realize that the quiet man she had once taken for granted was no longer waiting for her. My photograph appeared beneath a headline. Local startup founder turns failed logistics project into rising industry leader. Clara stared at the screen for a long time. Then she whispered my name, Daniel, and somewhere across the city, completely unaware that she was thinking about me, I was sitting in my new office with a woman named Sophie reviewing our next expansion plan. She looked at the figures, then at me. You're working too late again. I know. You always say that. I smiled. And you always complain. Because somebody has to. I looked at her. For some reason, being around Sophie felt easy. No guessing. No competition. No fear. Just peace. And I didn't know it yet. But she was about to become the first person in my new life who would teach me that love could feel nothing like the love I'd spent years chasing. Sophie never asked me about Clara. That was probably why I trusted her. She knew there had been someone before her. Everyone did. My name had become public enough that old rumors followed me around. But she never demanded details. She never asked whether I still loved Clara. She simply watched how I lived. When I stayed late, she brought dinner. When I became obsessed with a problem, she reminded me to sleep. When investors praised me, she was happy. When a project failed, she didn't disappear. The first time she held my hand, there was no dramatic confession. We were walking through the office after midnight. Everyone else had gone home. She stopped near the window. You know, she said, you don't have earned the right to rest. I laughed. I'm not sure I know how. Then learn. I looked at her. There was no pressure in her eyes. No expectation. Just warmth. I like you, I said. I know. You're not surprised? No. Why? Because you look at me differently. I smiled. And how do I look at you? Like I'm a person. That answer stayed with me. Because I suddenly realized how different that was from my old relationship. With Clara, I had always been trying to become someone worthy of being chosen. With Sophie, I could simply exist. We started dating quietly. There were no announcements. No photographs. No attempt to make anyone jealous. And for the first time, I understood that peaceful love wasn't boring. It was safe. Meanwhile, Clara's world was becoming increasingly unstable. The investigation into Ethan's financial misconduct became public. The company lost its remaining investors. Clara's family withdrew their support. Her father was furious. You defended him. I know. You ignored Daniel. I know. You knew he was building the software. Clara looked up sharply. What do you mean? Her father threw a file onto the table. Daniel designed the original prediction architecture. She opened it. There were old technical documents, design notes, development records, and something she had never known. Most of the company's core technology had been Daniel's work. Ethan had presented it. She had believed him. Her father continued. You thought Daniel was merely the cautious one who handled the boring details. Clara's hands trembled. He never told me, because he didn't care about credit. Yeah, full of sight. That was his mistake. Clara stared at the documents. Then she remembered something from years earlier. A winter evening. She had complained that Ethan was more ambitious than Daniel. Daniel had heard her. He had smiled and said, maybe you're right. She hadn't understood the sadness in his voice. Now she did. She had mistaken humility for weakness. That night, Clara went through every old photograph she had. University, graduation, her father's illness, their first apartment, a trip to the coast. Daniel was everywhere. Not because he demanded attention, because he had quietly been there. She found an old voice recording. Her own voice filled the room. If we ever break up, I hope we can still be friends. Daniel's younger voice laughed. Why will we break up? Clara's recorded voice answered playfully. Because life changes, Daniel said. Then if it changes, I'll still be there. Clara shut her eyes. He had kept that promise. She hadn't. The next morning, she came to my office. My assistant told me she was waiting. I looked at the clock. Let her in. Clara entered slowly. She looked different. Not physically, emotionally. There was no confidence left in her posture. No assumption that I would forgive her simply because she appeared. She stood several feet away. I owe you an apology. I nodded. You do. She swallowed. I didn't understand what you were doing. I know. I thought Ethan was the ambitious one. I know. I thought you were afraid of risk. I know. She looked down. I was wrong. I didn't say anything. She whispered. I was wrong about almost everything. I wanted to comfort her. Old habits are difficult to kill. But Sophie appeared behind me carrying 2 coffees. She stopped when she saw Clara. I introduced them. This is Sophie. Clara looked at her, then at me. Something passed across her face. Not anger. Something much quieter. Understanding. She realized I wasn't alone anymore. Clara looked at Sophie for several seconds. Then she smiled faintly. I've heard about you. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Hopefully nothing terrible. No. Clara looked at me. He seems happier. Sophie didn't respond. She simply handed me my coffee. That tiny gesture somehow hurt Clara more than any insult could have. Because it showed her what she had lost. Not my money. Not my company. Not my success. My ordinary life. The small moments. The trust. The person who would bring me coffee without asking whether I deserved it. Clara turned toward me. Can we talk privately? Sophie looked at me. I nodded. She left. Clara sat down. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already forgave you. She looked confused. Then why won't you come back? Because forgiveness isn't the same as trust. Her eyes reddened. Can trust be rebuilt? Maybe. She looked hopeful. I continued. But not between us. The hope disappeared. She lowered her head. I understand. For a moment, I felt something close to sadness. Not regret. Sadness. Because there had been a time when I would have given anything for her to sit in front of me and say those words. Now they came too late. She stood. Do you hate me? No. Do you ever think about what we could have been? I looked toward the window. Sometimes. She nodded. I do too. Then she asked the question I had expected. Was Ethan worth it? I looked back at her. That isn't the right question. What is? Why did you think you had to choose between us in the first place? She was silent. I continued. You didn't lose me because you chose Ethan. Her eyes filled with tears. You lost me because you kept choosing him after you knew what it was doing to me. She covered her mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. That was the part that broke me. Clara cried silently. I thought if I was patient enough, you'd eventually realize what was happening, I said. I thought love meant waiting. I paused. I was wrong. She wiped her face. And now I think love should also mean knowing when to leave. She nodded. I wish I had understood that. So do I. She walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned around. Daniel, yes, I really did love you. I believed her. That was the saddest part. I loved you too. She closed her eyes. But we weren't good for each other anymore. She left. I sat alone for several minutes. Then Sophie returned. She didn't ask what happened. She sat beside me. After a while, she said, "Do you want to talk?" I shook my head. "Not yet." She nodded. "Okay." That was all. No pressure. No jealousy. No demand for reassurance. Just presence. I reached for her hand. She held mine. Outside, the city continued moving. My past was still painful, but it no longer controlled me. Then my phone rang. Victor. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Daniel, you need to come in tomorrow." "Why?" "We received a legal notice." "From whom?" There was a pause. "Ethan's lawyers." I frowned. "What do they want?" "They're claiming your company stole intellectual property from your former partnership." I almost laughed. Of all the things I expected, that wasn't one of them. Victor continued. "And Daniel." "What?" "They're not just asking for money." My smile disappeared. "What are they asking for?" "They're claiming the technology belongs to Ethan's company." I looked at Sophie. She immediately knew something was wrong. I opened my old files. Then I found the document I had been searching for. The original development agreement. The one Ethan had forgotten existed. My signature. His signature. And one clause that could destroy his entire claim. I stared at it. Then I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time, the truth was finally on my side. The lawsuit lasted 11 months. 11 months of documents, interviews, depositions, and lawyers arguing over technology that had once been nothing more than an idea in my notebook. Ethan insisted I had stolen the company's core system. My lawyers presented the original development records. Then came the contract. The clause was simple. Any software independently developed by me outside company hours remained my intellectual property unless formally assigned in writing. There had never been such an assignment. Ethan had assumed the company owned everything because I had allowed him to present my work as a joint achievement. He had mistaken generosity for surrender. The court didn't. The claim against me was dismissed. Worse for Ethan, the investigation uncovered that he had transferred confidential client information while trying to strengthen his own position. His company collapsed completely. The consequences were not dramatic. There was no movie-style humiliation. No crowd gathered to laugh at him. He simply lost the things he had believed were permanent. His investors, his position, his reputation. Several years earlier, that would have satisfied me. Now, when I heard the news, I felt almost nothing. One evening, I was sitting with Sophie on the balcony of our apartment. She handed me a cup of tea. "You won." I nodded. "Yeah. You don't look happy." "I thought I would." She smiled. "That's because you didn't want to win." I looked at her. "You're right. What did you want?" I thought for a moment. "To stop being afraid." She took my hand. "You did." The next morning, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Clara. She didn't ask me to return. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply wrote that she had left the family company and started working for a nonprofit that helped small businesses recover from financial fraud. At the bottom, she wrote, "I used to think losing you meant losing the best man in my life. Now I understand the truth. I didn't lose you when you left. I lost you every time I asked you to wait while I chose someone else." I read the letter twice. Then I put it away. Not because I wanted to remember her. Because I no longer needed to forget her. There is a difference. Some wounds disappear. Others become scars. A scar doesn't hurt every day. It simply reminds you where you learn to be careful. My company continued growing. We expanded internationally. Our prediction system became one of the most widely used platforms in regional logistics. But I kept one thing unchanged. Every year, I returned to the little office where we had started. I would sit at the same desk, look at the old wall, and remember the version of myself who had almost given everything away just to be loved. 5 years after my second chance began, I returned to my university. The same library still stood there. The same old wooden tables. The same narrow windows. I walked to the corner where Clara had once fallen asleep on my shoulder. For a moment, I could almost see her. Young, tired, smiling. Then someone sat beside me. Sophie, you disappeared, she said. I was remembering. Anything important? I looked around. Yes. What? That I survived. She smiled. Good. I took her hand. I used to think happiness was something someone else had to give me. And now I think it's something you build. She leaned against my shoulder. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, Clara had fallen asleep against that same shoulder. But the meaning was completely different. One memory belonged to the person I had been. The other belonged to the person I had become. Then my phone rang. My assistant told me that an international investment group wanted to meet. I almost declined. Then I heard the name. North Star Holdings. It was the largest logistics investment firm in the region. They wanted to acquire a major share of my company. I smiled. Tell them I'll meet them. Sophie looked at me. Another big deal? Apparently. Are you going to sell? I shook my head. I don't know yet. She smiled. Good. What? You finally sound like someone making a choice instead of running from one. The North Star meeting took place in a glass tower overlooking the harbor. As I entered the conference room, I recognized several faces. Executives, investors, lawyers, and one person I hadn't expected. Clara's father. He stood when I entered. Daniel. I stopped. Mr. Morgan. He extended his hand. I shook it. He looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired. I wanted to speak with you personally. About the investment? Partly. I sat down. He remained standing for a moment. Then he said, my daughter was wrong about you. I didn't answer. She wasn't the only one. That surprised me. He continued. I knew you were talented. Then why didn't you say anything? He looked uncomfortable. Because I thought Clara would always be the deciding factor in your life. I smiled sadly. So did I. He sat across from me. I owe you an apology. You don't. I do. He looked at me carefully. You were family once. I shook my head. No. He frowned. You were someone I loved, I said. That's different. The distinction seemed to affect him. After the meeting, he stopped me outside. Daniel. I turned. My daughter still regrets what happened. I know. She thinks you'll never forgive her. I forgave her years ago. Then why won't you speak to her? I looked toward the elevators. Because she doesn't need my forgiveness anymore. He didn't understand. I continued. She needs to forgive herself. Then I left. That evening, Clara called. I answered. Hello. There was a long silence. Daniel. Yes. Dad told me he saw you. He did. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not humiliating us. I leaned against the window. I never wanted revenge. I know. She took a shaky breath. I used to think you were weak because you didn't fight for yourself. I smiled faintly. I was weak. She was silent. I let my fear of losing you decide everything. I'm sorry. I know. Daniel. Yes. Are you happy? I looked across the room. Sophie was cooking dinner while listening to music. She noticed me watching and smiled. Yes. Clara's voice trembled. I'm glad. That was the last time we spoke. Not because everything was suddenly perfect. Because sometimes closure doesn't require another conversation. It requires accepting that the conversation is over. A year later, Sophie and I got married. There was no extravagant ceremony. My parents cried. Victor gave an embarrassing speech. Our employees danced until midnight. And when Sophie walked toward me, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about Clara. Not even for a second. I wasn't comparing. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply happy to see the woman I loved walking toward me. After the ceremony, Sophie asked me a question. Do you ever think about the life you almost had? I considered it. Yes. She looked at me curiously. What do you think? I smiled. I think it taught me how to appreciate this one. She rested her head against my shoulder. That's a good answer. Years later, our company became larger than I had ever imagined. But I didn't become obsessed with money. We created scholarships for students who couldn't afford university. We funded small transport businesses. And every year, I returned to my old university with a lecture. I always told the students the same thing. Don't spend your life trying to convince someone of your value. Some laughed. Some wrote it down. A few understood. I understood because I had lived it. As for Clara, I eventually heard that she had built a quiet life of her own. She was no longer surrounded by wealth. She no longer chased people who impressed her. She worked with small businesses and lived modestly. Maybe she found happiness. Maybe she didn't. That was no longer my story. And strangely, that was the greatest proof that I had finally healed. Because once, I needed to know what happened to her. Now I didn't. I had spent years believing the person who rejected me would one day regret losing me. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was realizing I no longer needed her regret. I had my family, my work, my purpose, my friends, my wife, and a life that belonged completely to me. The old Daniel had begged to be chosen. The new Daniel understood something much more important. Sometimes the person you desperately want to choose you is simply not the person you should spend your life waiting for. And sometimes walking away isn't losing. Sometimes it is the first decision you make for yourself. 10 years after I walked away from Clara, I returned to the same university library where our story had once begun. The building had been renovated. The wooden tables were gone. The windows were larger. The walls were brighter. But the corner where I had once sat with Clara remained almost exactly the same. I stood there for a while. Then Sophie came up beside me. "You're remembering again." I smiled. "Old habit." She slipped her hand into mine. "Are you sad?" I thought about it. No. That answer surprised even me. There had been a time when I believed certain memories would always hurt. I had been wrong. Some memories don't disappear. They simply stop having power over you. We had come back for the opening of a scholarship program my company had funded. After the ceremony, I walked outside and saw a familiar figure waiting near the steps. Clara. She looked older, calmer. There was no desperation in her expression, no expectation. She simply smiled. "Congratulations." "Thank you." She looked at Sophie. "It's good to see you." Sophie smiled politely. "You too." Clara hesitated. Then she said, "I won't keep you long." I nodded. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. I understood. She had never really gotten that chance. We stood beneath the old trees. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Clara laughed softly. "Do you remember when you said you wouldn't wait for me?" "Yes." "I didn't believe you." "I know. I thought you were angry." "I was." She looked at me. "Were you angry for a long time?" I considered the question. "At first, yes. And later?" "Later, I was angry at myself." "Why?" "Because I realized I'd spent years asking you to choose me when I should have been choosing myself." Her eyes became wet. "I think I understand now." I nodded. She looked towards Sophie. "She seems kind." "She is. Take care of her." I smiled. "I will." Clara laughed quietly. "You know, I used to think Ethan was the person I regretted choosing." I remained silent. "But he wasn't." She looked directly at me. "You were the person I regretted losing." The words were honest. And once, they would have destroyed me. Now they simply made me sad. Not for myself. For the years we had both wasted. "I hope you find peace," I said. She nodded. "I think I finally have." We said goodbye. No dramatic embrace. No promise to remain friends. No attempt to reopen an old door. Just two people acknowledging that something important had once existed between them. Then Clara walked away. Sophie waited until she was out of sight. "Are you okay?" I smiled. "I'm more than okay." She looked at me. "What does it feel like?" "What?" "To finally meet the person you used to think you'd spend your life with." I squeezed her hand. "It feels like meeting an old version of myself." She smiled. "And do you miss him?" I looked back at the library. No. That evening, we drove home. Our children were waiting. Our daughter ran outside first. "Dad." Our son followed, holding a model airplane he had built. I crouched down as they both talked over each other. Sophie laughed. For a moment, I looked at my family, and something inside me settled. This was the life I had almost missed. Not because Clara had chosen Ethan. Not because Ethan had betrayed me. Not because my company had nearly failed. But because I had once been so afraid of losing someone that I had forgotten there was a whole world beyond them. I had learned that lesson twice. Once through pain, and once through choice. That night, after the children went to sleep, Sophie and I sat on the balcony. The city lights stretched across the horizon. She rested her head against my shoulder. "You were quiet tonight." "I was thinking." "About Clara?" I smiled. Yes. Sophie didn't become jealous. She simply waited. I finally realized something, I said. What? I used to think the story was about her choosing between me and Ethan. Sophie looked at me. It wasn't. No. I took her hand. It was about me choosing who I wanted to become. She smiled. That sounded more like you. I laughed. Probably. We sat in silence. Then I thought about the night I had stood across from Clara and told her to choose Ethan. Back then, I thought I was giving up. I didn't realize I was finally beginning. I had walked away without knowing whether I would succeed. I had no guarantee Victor would invest. No guarantee the company would survive. No guarantee I would ever love again. All I had was one decision. I would stop begging to be chosen. Everything after that came slowly. The failed projects, the sleepless nights, the small victories, the people who believed in me, the people who didn't, the company, my parents' new home, Sophie, our children, my life. None of it happened because I defeated the people who hurt me. It happened because I stopped making them the center of my world. Years later, people sometimes ask me about the beginning of my company. They want to know how I handled betrayal, how I recovered after losing everything, how I became successful. They expected some brilliant secret. There wasn't one. I simply learned to stop returning to places where I had already been hurt. And I learned that forgiveness was not an invitation. You could forgive someone and still close the door. You could wish someone well and still never speak to them again. You could remember the good parts of a relationship without pretending the bad parts never happened. Most importantly, you could love someone once and still decide that loving them again would be a betrayal of yourself. Clara had once asked me whether I hated her. I hadn't. I never did. Hatred would have kept her important. Indifference was not what I felt either. Indifference meant I had forgotten. I hadn't forgotten. I simply understood. She had been part of my story. She was not the author of it. The next morning, I walked into my office. The same company that had once fit inside a tiny room now occupied several floors. My assistant handed me a report. Another record quarter. I smiled. Good. Anything else? I looked through the glass wall at my employees. Hundreds of people were building things together. People who trusted each other. People who had their own dreams. I shook my head. No, that's enough. She smiled. That's not the answer I expected. I laughed. Success taught me something strange. What? Eventually, you stop needing more. I walked to the window. Outside, the city was moving. People were rushing to work. Cars crossed the bridges. The world continued exactly as it always had. But I was no longer chasing it. I had arrived. Not at the place where everyone admired me. Not at the place where Clara regretted losing me. Not at the place where Ethan failed. I had arrived at something much quieter. A life I didn't need to escape from. A family I didn't have to earn. A wife who chose me without being asked. Children who loved me without knowing my achievements. Work that mattered. And a future that belonged to me. Sometimes people think revenge means making the person who hurt you suffer. I used to think that too. Now I know better. The greatest revenge is not watching them regret losing you. It's reaching the day when their regret no longer matters. Clara chose her rival. She believed she was choosing the man who could give her the life she wanted. I let her choose. And eventually, she discovered what she had actually lost. Not my money. Not my company. Not my success. She lost a version of me who would have stayed no matter how badly I was treated. That man was gone. But the person who replaced him was finally free. I looked at my reflection in the window. For a second, I remembered the frightened young man who had once stood in a hospital room, staring at a calendar and wondering whether life was giving him another chance. He had thought the second chance was about changing the past. He was wrong. It was about changing himself. And perhaps that was why the future had finally become worth living. I turned away from the window. My phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. Dinner at 7. Don't be late. I smiled. Then I typed back. I'll be home. And this time, when I walked away from the office, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward everything that mattered.